The United States, with its convoluted financial and political systems, is currently facing an impending disaster of potentially cataclysmic proportions. According to a recent report by the Washington Post, the country could default as early as June 1st due to the rapidly depleting deadline pressure. This has left the U.S. Congress and the White House scrambling to negotiate a debt ceiling agreement with the government's creditors. The stakes are high, and Treasury Secretary Yellen has warned lawmakers that the so-called X-Day could come as early as June 1st. If the debt ceiling is not raised, it could result in a severe credit market crunch for U.S. businesses and individuals who rely on loans to survive, such as military families and elderly people who rely on Social Security. The consequences of a default could result in job losses, skyrocketing repayment rates for mortgages, car loans, and credit cards, which could destabilize the entire economy. Despite the apparent gravity of the situation, there are still political battles raging in Congress over the debt issue. House Republicans insist that raising the debt ceiling must be predicated on significantly cutting government spending, while the White House views cutting spending and raising the debt ceiling as two separate issues and hopes to raise the debt ceiling unconditionally. Currently, congressional leaders and White House officials have about a month to negotiate raising the government's borrowing limit, but they may have only 6 days to discuss a solution. However, both sides have yet to show any willingness to compromise, further complicating matters. Both Congress and the White House are scheduled to enter a recess soon, with no intention on either side to change their schedules or extend the congressional session. The potential consequences of a U.S. default are dire, not just for the economy, but also for the country's global image. According to U.S. Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines, China and Russia could exploit the debt crisis to portray the U.S. as a dysfunctional, chaotic, and unstable country, creating doubts about its democratic institutions and leadership roles globally. Haynes's testimony before the Senate Armed Services Committee further complicates the situation, adding to the already existing uncertainty. The Biden administration is aware of the grave risks posed by a debt default, and the White House and the Federal Reserve have issued warnings about the looming catastrophe. Treasury Secretary Yellen wrote to the leaders of the U.S. Congress, informing them that the government's borrowing limit is being consumed faster than anticipated. She emphasized that waiting until the last minute to solve the problem could seriously damage the confidence of businesses and consumers, raise short-term borrowing costs for the public, and have a negative impact on the U.S. credit rating. In response to Yellen's warning, U.S. President Biden has announced his intention to convene a meeting with leaders of both parties in Congress next week to discuss possible solutions. However, with the clock ticking down and no clear path forward, the U.S. is facing an uncertain future that could have severe consequences for its people and the world. The concept of the debt ceiling has been a topic of heated discussion in recent times. This refers to the maximum amount of borrowing that the U.S. Congress allows the federal government to undertake in order to fulfill its payment obligations. However, if this red line is breached, it would indicate that the U.S. Treasury's borrowing authority has been exhausted. The implications of a long-term debt default for the U.S. economy were highlighted in a forecast report released by the White House Council of Economic Advisors. According to the report, such an event could lead to the loss of 8.3 million jobs and a 6.1% drop in the country's gross domestic product. Federal Reserve Chairman Powell has warned that the Fed would be unable to protect the U.S. economy from the potential short-term and long-term impacts of a debt default. The risk of a debt default in the U.S. is becoming increasingly intense, and this has led central banks in many countries to take necessary actions based on their own financial security. This has included buying gold, as reflected in the latest Global Gold Demand Trends report released by the World Gold Council. The report reveals that the demand for gold purchases by central banks in many countries saw a significant increase in the first quarter of this year, and that global central bank gold reserves increased by 228 tons. Among these, China, Singapore, and Turkey had the largest increases. The reasons behind this global gold buying spree are manifold. They include continuing geopolitical tensions, banking instability, and a challenging and uncertain economic environment. Moreover, countries are increasingly seeking to reduce their dependence on the U.S. dollar and diversify their foreign exchange reserves for multiple reasons. Compared to the U.S. dollar, gold can play a more important role as a safe haven asset. As of the end of March this year, the top 6 countries in terms of gold reserves were the United States, China, Russia, Germany, France, and Italy. the world's total gold reserves reached 35,815 tons. This trend further reflects a shift in attitudes towards the US dollar among countries as they increasingly distrust it as a safe asset. Some critics have attributed this trend to what they view as the US abusing its hegemonic position by politicizing its economy, deliberately freezing Russia's overseas assets, and using them as an important economic weapon to sanction Russia. These actions are seen as an important reason for the current decline in the purchasing power of the US dollar and have reduced the sense of security that other countries have in it. Moreover, the US has conducted multiple rounds of quantitative easing to alleviate its own inflation, which has further eroded the credibility of the US government and the US dollar. Therefore, China and other countries are constantly buying gold in order to find a safer asset. As more and more countries around the world accelerate the process of de-dollarization, the US is showing signs of panic. The two parties in the US are still deadlocked on the issue of raising the debt ceiling, and it is proving difficult to reach a consensus. This is despite the serious consequences that a spillover of its economic crisis may bring, and the US is even willing to damage the interests of other countries to feed its own economy. These actions are allowing more and more countries to see the true face of the United States. The U.S. debt ceiling is the maximum amount of borrowing Congress allows the government to undertake for payment obligations. A default could lead to severe economic consequences, including job losses and a GDP drop. The risk of default has caused central banks worldwide to increase gold purchases, with China, Singapore, and Turkey leading the way. Countries seek to diversify reserves and reduce dependence on the US dollar. This trend reflects a shift in attitudes towards the US dollar among countries that increasingly distrust it as a safe asset. Critics blame US hegemonic abuse, sanctions, and quantitative easing for the decline in the dollar's purchasing power, and China continues to buy gold as a safer asset, with the US still deadlocked on raising the debt ceiling. More and more countries are seeing the true face of the United States. Express your thoughts by leaving a comment in the section below. We appreciate you for sticking with us until the end of this video. Before you leave, please show your support by giving us a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest videos. We look forward to seeing you again for more captivating content in the future.